We've all been lied to, not just you, but all of us. For 3,000 years, we've been lied to. Complete lie. That, for example, that we're rational beings. We are not rational beings. No, we're not rational beings. Socrates was wrong. Plato was wrong. Aristotle was wrong. Bishop Augustine, Bishop of Hippo was wrong. Immanuel Kant was wrong. Descartes was wrong. They're all wrong.
So tell me,
because and the reason they're wrong is because they didn't have the benefit of neuroscience. And now we know.
Interesting.
We are emotional beings, not rational beings. And once you get that insight, everything changes.
So you worked in law for 22 years, right?
I was the supreme rationalist.
How would you make such a realization that we are not rational beings?
Well, the transformation took quite a while. It didn't happen overnight. But where I started the transformation in the 80s. And then I ended up going back to school and getting my master's degree in the mid-90s in peacemaking and conflict studies. And that completely opened my eyes to human conflict in a way that the law completely misses. And I just made the decision to quit. And I literally gave 1 week's notice to my partners with a 22-year law practice and walked away, left $10 million on the table and just walked away from it.
Wow.
And from there on out, I was being engaged to come into these high-end intense conflicts and help people work through a process so they could solve their conflicts. Sometimes they were litigated disputes. Sometimes they were not litigated, like family business conflicts or congregational disputes. And I was studying neuroscience at the time. And suddenly it dawned on me that as I was reading and studying that what people like Antonio Damasio were saying was what I was seeing right in front of me every day. That people are emotional. They're not rational. They're never rational. And they're especially not rational when they're in conflict. Totally emotionally driven. And so I began to, as I was reading the science, and started learning the science and then watching behaviors, I saw how the behaviors were tracking exactly what the neuroscientists were saying. And this is something else to know, exactly the opposite of what the psychologists were saying. The psychologists had no clue. They were all back on Freud and Jung and all those guys who were all wrong. They're all wrong. Freud's completely wrong. There's nothing about Freud that's truthful. No, there's not one scientific empirical study that establishes that Freud had any empirical validity in his thinking at all. Now, the guy was a genius. No question about that, but he was wrong. Every single one of his theories was wrong.
So what was wrong about them, right? What was wrong about
so
the
let's start off with his data set. His data set was 15 upper middle class Viennese women in their 40s. That was his data set. Every single theory that he developed was based on those 15 women. He was a sexist beyond belief. Of course, all the men back then were, and he was Jewish too. So he had his own guilt burden and his own shame burden. Plus, he's trying to become a professor at the University of Vienna, and he is building up all these theories of mind, which is where he's a genius. He was the first one to start trying to formulate what's going on. And he was using his metaphor, for example, neuroses and psychoses, and how emotions build up, and then if you don't release them and have catharsis, then it blows up in you. Well, he was using metaphor from the 19th century Industrial Revolution with the 3 laws of thermodynamics. And in those days, boilers were blowing up because they had lousy metallurgy and poor controls. And so the steam boiler would build pressure, and boom, and a whole bunch of people would die. And so he started using the idea of steam as a metaphor for emotions, because that's what he thought he was seeing. But that's not what happens at all. Not even close. And so then he built up this whole edifice, theoretical edifice around the ego, the id, the superego. No, there's no such thing as that. None of that's true. And there's absolutely no neuroscience to support anything that he taught. And then other people came off of him, like Jung and other people came off of him, because he was the one that broke the waters and said, hey, let's start thinking about mind. And they all started coming up with these theories that they were just theories based on very superficial observation of human behavior. And the whole edifice of psychology was built on that. And then of course, there was a reaction to that in the 1940s. The behaviorists came in with Skinner and Watson. So they drove everybody only to behaviorism. And that lasted until basically the mid 70s, when cognitive psychology came into play and people started looking at cognition, they started doing different kinds of experiments. But the psychologists were still way off because nobody could really look at the brain until 1993, when functional magnetic resonance imaging came into play. And now we can actually watch the brain operate. Now, granted, there are limitations to fMRI, but there are a whole bunch of other technologies that have been developed that allow scientists to see what is actually going on. And what they see is not what Freud or Jung or any of these other guys, Adler or any of these guys talked about. It's totally different, totally different.
So you make this claim, and I've understood, right? And I believe it, like I've seen it, you know, and this is based off the neuroscientific evidence. How exactly can I calm someone down in 90 seconds?
3 steps. Step number 1, ignore the words. You've got somebody you can have two situations. You got somebody who's really angry, but not at you, or you can have somebody who's really angry at you. Doesn't matter. Ignore the words. Make it white noise for 2 reasons. Number 1, if you listen to the words, you're going to get triggered, and then you're going to go back into childhood programming, and the conflict's going to escalate, and it's going to get worse. That's especially if somebody's angry at you. If you're watching somebody be angry, but they're not angry at you, then the next thing that's going to happen if you don't ignore the words is your anxiety is going to come up, and you're going to try to unconsciously self-soothe yourself, and you're going to make all kinds of stupid stuff that everybody does all the time. You're going to go into problem solving, you're going to get defensive, you're going to try to appease, you're going to try to use rational explanation, you're going to emotionally invalidate. All you're going to do is make it worse.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody does, because nobody knows any better. Yeah. Ignore the words. The second reason you ignore the words is because you have to open up bandwidth in your brain to do the next 2 steps. So ignore the words. It's just noise. Don't even pay attention to it. There's nothing there that you're going to miss. You've heard those angry words many times before.
Yeah.
Second step, read the emotions. Now, it's very obvious with an angry person that they've got anger, but underneath that are almost always 6 or 7 other emotions. And so what you learn to do is to read all of those underlying emotions. And here's the thing that's really cool. Our brains are hardwired for this. The reason that we don't use this skill is because we have such a bias against emotions and such a bias towards, quote, rationality, that we never learn to utilize this innate skill. But it's so simple to use. All you have to do is sit there, say somebody's just screaming at you, you're ignoring the words, you're just breathing, you're just sort of being present, and you wait, let your brain preconsciously process what's going on, and all of a sudden these emotions will start to flow into your brain. And so all of a sudden now you know exactly what to say. And then the third step, which is the key, is to reflect back the emotions with a you statement. Not an I statement, a you statement. So it would go like this. Nick, man, you are really pissed off. You're really angry. You're really frustrated. You don't feel supported. You feel completely betrayed. You're unappreciated. And you're feeling a little bit of anxiety around this. It's a little scary for you because you don't know what's going to happen next. And you're a little sad because nobody's around you supporting you, and you feel like you've been completely abandoned. And the whole thing is just really pissing you off, and you're really frustrated.
You want to know something? So
you had a reaction to that, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it actually like had an effect on me, like what you just said there. Like I was sitting there, and like I felt, you know, I'm watching your YouTube videos and trying to understand, like, okay, what is this method that's supported by neuroscience and all this stuff? It felt a little patronizing, right? It felt like not now, but just like when I'm thinking
watching me do it, and that's what everybody says.
Yeah, like it feels like you're pulling some psychological technique, and like it's more of like a stop messing with me. But I wasn't even mad, and I just felt some sort of like
relief. You felt like you felt validated and listened to.
And I felt calm.
That's right. And that's it, and it happens unconsciously, and you're not even aware of it. From the outsider, it looks rude, it looks patronizing, it looks manipulative.
Yeah.
It looks like you're violating all kinds of social norms about interruptions. I mean, it looks awful.
Yeah.
but when I do it to this is what's so fun. When I do workshops, I'll do just what I did with you. I say, well, Nick, come on up and tell me a story. So you tell me a story about something that went on. And so I affect label you. And this is called affect labeling. And you relax and say, wow, yeah, exactly. And then I turn to everybody in the workshop. So what did you just see? And invariably people are going to say, that was the rudest, I could never do that. And I'll turn to Nick and say, Nick, what was the experience like for you? And you'll say, I've never been so deeply listened to before in my life. And everybody in the workshop, their jaws drop. They say, what? No way. And they'll start cross-examining Nick, right? Say, Nick, come on. Didn't you feel like he was really interrupting? No, he wasn't interrupting me at all. He was really listening to me. I really felt like he was working with me. And I really felt validated. And they're all just shaking their heads. They can't believe it.